But there were some variations in the explanations offered, and these variations may provide some important clues to the extent to which the Jägerstätter myth, that is, the man as he is remembered in the community, may fall short of the reality. For most of the villagers, and even most of his closest friends, the event which brought about the difference in Franz was his marriage in 1936 and his honeymoon trip to Rome, in the course of which the newlyweds received the papal blessing in a public audience. Some people felt that Franz had been so impressed by seeing the Pope that he decided then and there to reform his ways completely. However, the townspeople generally stressed the marriage itself. For them, the critical element was the intense religiosity of the woman he chose to marry. More than one person told me that she had always been exceptionally devout and had intended to enter the religious life before her marriage to Franz, a belief, incidentally, that was not confirmed in my interviews with the widow. One man who offered many cautious reservations, since he had been away from St. Radegund during these years, even remarked that when people had described the change that had taken place in Jägerstätter, they all believed that Mrs. Jägerstätter had much to do with it, an explanation he was obviously willing to accept. This is not just a matter of acknowledging the influence of a good woman in the reformation of a wild youth, for this explanation must be seen in the context of what was to follow and how those events are looked upon by the community. In a very real sense, this explanation of the change, to the extent that it is a causal explanation, as it is in the minds of most who accept it, may be converted into a charge that the widow is to be held responsible for the later tragic developments in the Jägerstätter story. His new religiosity is viewed as having led him to the fanaticism which brought about his death. To the extent that the belief is held, and it is widely held in the community, that Jägerstätter's actions were a sign of mental derangement, this attributing the change in him to his wife's influence could mask an element of animosity, probably unconscious, toward her. An example of this may be found in the frequently heard observation that she made no real effort to get her husband to alter his final decision and accept military service, a statement she took pains to deny when I spoke to her. It would be wrong to magnify this possibility of latent hostility. Just as there were no openly vindictive or malicious judgments passed on Franz by the persons interviewed, so too there were no openly adverse or unfavorable comments voiced about his widow. The references to her religiosity, even to her presumed influence on her husband, were always highly complimentary. Nevertheless, the effect of these opinions was to give her a major share of the responsibility for a change which did not meet with community approval, and for the results of that change, which are regarded as a senseless tragedy. Two bits of evidence would seem to disprove the explanation of the change in Franz in terms of his marriage. The first and most explicit is Father Karabat's information that Jägerstätter had previously indicated a desire to enter a religious order. The priest had counseled against this step by pointing out that the young man had an obligation to his parents to take over the operation of the farm. This obviously indicates that some change had already taken place before his marriage, probably before he had even considered marriage or met the girl who was to become his wife. The other evidence is found, of course, in the letter to his godchild. It is not dated, but the recipient remembers that it came when he was 16. If he is correct, the letter would have been written in 1936, the year of Jägerstätter's wedding. But the failure to mention this event or to refer to the trip to Rome and the experience of seeing the Pope clearly indicates that it must have been written before these events took place. Yet the tone of the excerpts quoted from this letter shows that the change had already taken place. This puts things in quite a different light. For one thing, it would now be permissible to explain his choice of a bride in terms of his recognition of characteristics in her that would be in keeping with his new spiritual outlook. This could still mean that it was his marriage which brought the visible change in his behavior. His marriage to a woman of like mind and equal depth of moral commitment would have provided him with the kind of support that would make it easier for him to reveal in his external behavior the interior change that had already taken place. The same is true of the trip to Rome. A Viennese woman who had been a regular visitor to St. Radegund at the time remembered being shown the honeymoon photographs taken in the Eternal City. She had been most impressed by the fact that an ordinary peasant from a remote rural village should even have had the idea of making